Welcome to the France 24 debate, and if you're just joining us, I'm Annette Young. And within hours of announcing the end of its military campaign against Houthi rebels in Yemen, Saudi-led coalition planes bombed the city of Taiz. Fighting is also continuing in the port city of Aden and in other flashpoints. And all this despite Riyadh declaring its month-long campaign, which sought to restore the country's president, had achieved its goals. But the surprise statement raises more questions than answers, since the deposed leader has not been restored, not to mention that Houthi fighters are still in control of the capital of Sana'a. Now, with me to talk about the mess that is Yemen is William Jordan, a former US State Department official, Ardavan Amir Aslani, a lawyer and author of several books on Islam and Iran, and a frequent guest here in the debate. From London, Ali Shihabi, a Saudi commentator, and from Washington, Barbara Slavin, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and Washington correspondent for Our Monitor. And you too, the viewer, can join the conversation on Twitter. That's hashtag F24debate. But before we begin, Delano de Souza has more on the conflict.
Months of chaos for Yemen. Last September, Shiite Houthi rebels seized control of the capital, Sana'a. They surrounded the presidential palace and rendered President Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi a virtual prisoner. In January, the Houthis' grip on the capital intensified. A month later, Hadi submitted his resignation, a move rejected by parliament. Yemen's president fled to the southern port city of Aden, and as the Houthi rebels backed by Iran, according to some, advanced south, he fled once again, this time to Saudi Arabia. A power vacuum and overwhelming gains by Houthis in Yemen triggered a Saudi response. They launched an offensive to target the rebels on the 26th of March. Since then, over 2,000 airstrikes have been conducted to destroy Houthi infrastructure. Many analysts view the conflict in Yemen as a proxy war by the region's two most influential powers, Iran and Saudi Arabia. With the death toll at over 900, Operation Decisive Storm has now been paused in hopes for a political solution. But despite the coalition's efforts over the past month, President Hadi remains out of the country, while Yemen's capital, Sana'a, is still in rebel hands.
William Jordan, where do things exactly stand now, given that it appears that the campaign isn't really over?
Well, I think we're going to continue to see violence. We're going to continue to see efforts by the Houthi to extend fully throughout Aden in the south their control, to create conditions that would make it impossible for President Hadi to return, and a certain sense of defiance against the Saudis. The one thing that could change things is if, under a form of international pressure, the Houthis decide that, yes, there's been enough violence and it's time to return to trying to find a political settlement. The question is really whether or not between Sana'a and Riyadh, there's a political will to go beyond words to actually returning to a meaningful political process. In that context, the humanitarian crisis that is looking set to unleash its full fury, if that happens the way a lot of the experts are saying it will, that could be a pressure point as well.
You certainly saw a lot of anger in the streets today in Sana'a with that rally, didn't you?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of frustration on the part of the Yemenis. But look, I mean, this is what I find personally frustrating about the continuing references to all of this as a proxy war. What is ultimately at play here is an intra-Yemeni conflict that pits forces that have managed to, that were once arrayed against the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, now allied with him, trying to, with Ali Abdullah Saleh trying to use those forces to secure his re-entry into power, much more so than any kind of Sunni-Shia split, and by drawing the Saudis in the way that they have, it has made the conflict something that has gone beyond Yemen, and threatens to bring in other countries in the region, other neighbors, the Horn of Africa, in a way that could lead to this spinning out of control and playing out for years rather than the months that it should be playing out.
At this point, let me just bring in Barbara Slavin from Washington. I mean, this must be a sort of a nightmare for the White House. In fact, these Saudi operations couldn't come at a worse time, could they? And given the announcement last night from Riyadh, Washington must have breathed a sigh of relief, but that didn't last for very long, did it?
Well, there was a statement put out by the National Security Council about 6 o'clock this morning welcoming the Saudi announcement. So yes, indeed, the White House would like this conflict certainly to end, not just for humanitarian reasons, but because it's an unpleasant distraction at a time that the United States and Iran are trying to conclude a nuclear agreement. So for a number of reasons, I think the U.S. has been putting pressure on the parties to come to the table. And I believe the Iranians have been doing the same with the Houthis. Now, as your previous speaker pointed out, this is an intra-Yemeni fight, so they don't always listen to their various sponsors and outside supporters.
And Ali, in London, what is the reasoning behind that announcement last night from Riyadh, do you think?
Well, I think that the Saudi government intelligently realized that continuing this campaign could bring it into a quagmire. So I think it was a very smart exit strategy, which announced in a way an achievement of its goals and allowed it to extract itself. I think Saudi Arabia achieved two very important objectives in this. First of all, as far as domestic politics was concerned, it was able to show its people that the government has teeth, has muscle, and that this perceived surrounding by Iran and her proxies and enemies of the kingdom will be dealt with aggressively. And that same messaging worked also in the region. The Iranians, who have a very well-proven expertise in projecting power, have taken advantage of what was essentially an intra-Yemeni conflict. Yemen has serious problems. It has economic problems. It has political problems. And the Houthi movement, was part of that. The Iranians have been very clever over the past 5 years in beginning to establish relationships with the Houthis, helping them train. I mean, the New York Times in 2012 quoted the administration as saying that the Iranians are offering the Houthis sort of the same roadmap as they offered Hezbollah. So I think Saudi Arabia was very concerned, the Saudi people were concerned, and the government achieved a lot domestically in projecting its power through the air campaign, and by being able to, frankly, extract itself after this, after this campaign had gone on for a month.
Ali,
it was a clever move, really.
Really? Because have they really extracted themselves, given that we saw airstrikes continuing in the early hours of this morning?
Yes, but they have defined, they have defined an end game. They have said that we are finishing the bombing campaign, but we will continue to put pressure. So effectively, they've told the people of Sana'a and the people of the major cities that there won't be a continued bombing campaign, but they've left the door open to tell the Houthis that if necessary, there will be selective strikes. So I think they've tried to put a balance, but again, look, it's politics and it's media management and it's the way you present it to the world.
And it's diplomatic doublespeak, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it has to be doublespeak. You have to play that game, and part of the whole objective behind this was messaging, messaging domestically, messaging regionally, and even messaging to the Americans. So I think to that extent, it has been a successful step taken by the Saudi government.
Ardavan, it's not just the Saudis who are playing this game. The Iranians have also had a role in all of this too.
The Iranians, for sure, have their own role, but elsewhere. I think it is fundamental for everyone to understand that what is happening in Yemen today is not, as it was mentioned by William, a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Journalists constantly refer to the Houthis as the Iran-backed rebel movement.
Well, just how much level of support do they have?
I'll come to that. The reality is that the Houthis, which represent a Shia-affiliated minority in Saudi Arabia, represent nearly 40%, in Yemen, represent nearly 40% of the entire Yemeni population, of 28 million. It's about their struggle for better power sharing and for a struggle for no longer being treated as second-class citizens. Saudi Arabia and the coalition that it put on this matter, which basically is comprised solely of Sunni powers, Morocco, Egypt, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, is trying to convey the image that this is a war with Iran. It is not. Had Iran been really involved, the outcome would have been different. What we're seeing today is 170 fighter jets, more than 2,000 sorties, hitting a population, primarily civilian, 1,000 dead, against people who are basically equipped militarily only with Kalashnikovs. Where is Iran over here?
So let me...
The fact that they are Shia or Shia affiliated, of course, heartens them to the heart of the Iranians, that's for sure. But is this a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia? No. And what has Saudi Arabia managed to achieve? The only decisive dimension, decisive storm, was, destroying the infrastructure of Yemeni cities, as we've seen. They haven't prevented the Houthis from taking over substantial parts of Aden. Sana'a is still in their control. They've taken over Taiz. They haven't even dared put foot on the ground. It's not an intra.
But what is the level of Iranian support?
I'm sure the Iranians have provided ideological backing. I'm sure the Iranians have provided financial support. But I'm not sure, as a matter of fact, I'm sure of the contrary, there are no Iranian troops on the ground. This is a fact. Had there been troops on the ground, we would have witnessed that. Had there been Iranian military equipment, it would have been obvious. That's not true.
I would note in that this has actually been one of the things that U.S. spokespeople talking, about all of this, trying to answer questions from journalists like you, pressing them on exactly what's going on. They've not been able to answer. The details are not there. The presumption, and I stress, the presumption has been that a certain quantity of Iranian-supplied weapons have gone into Yemen and to help the Houthi. But the Houthi are not agents or proxies of the Iranians. Indeed, some have argued that the Zaidi sect of Shia Islam that they represent is not the same as the majority Shia sect that governs Iran. Second, there are plenty of weapons in Yemen, and there are plenty of other sources, regional sources of weapons for Yemen, that what Iran would bring to the conflict would be, if not a drop in the bucket, it would be virtually insignificant.
But a lot of this is due to image, and you talk about political doublespeak, and you talk about how it's been spun to various parts of the region. And as far as the Saudis and the Gulf states are concerned, they do see this as a Sunni versus Shiite war.
Which is a complete and utter distortion of what's going on. But it fits with the Saudi narrative. And again, I think, we can talk a lot about this. I mean, Saudi Arabia desperately needs some kind of way to pitch what's going on to its people to justify the intervention that is still, it has not just ended, it's going to continue, perhaps in a slightly different way, because the Saudis have realized that they probably overreached and they cannot actually achieve their objectives militarily, and they have to fall back and figure out what else to do.
And a ground operation would be very messy.
Right. And the other part of this, and the Pakistanis and the Egyptians, who I think they would normally expect to provide the ground troops for something like that, aren't willing to do so. There's also the aspect of this where the Saudis, I think, have to prove to their people that this public stance that they've been taking vis-a-vis the United States, because of how they see the United States selling them out for the sake of the negotiations with Iran on the nuclear program, they need to deliver something to the people to make the people feel good. There's also finally the added dimension that, as far as Saudi concerns about the always restive Shia population in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, around the oil-producing areas, just across from Bahrain, a majority Shia country. By having this, by spinning everything as a Shia-Sunni conflict, they're sending a very strong message to those populations: keep cool or else.
Ali Shabibi in London, do you have anything to say on this?
Yes, I have a lot to say, actually. If you look at what has been happening over the last few years, the involvement of Iran through Hezbollah in establishing a relationship with the Houthi movement, in beginning to give them, it's not so much an issue of weapons, as we all know that the Middle East is full of weapons, but it's a question of training, and it's a question of building up the organizational structure that Hezbollah has a lot of experience with. And in fact, if you look at the speech of Hassan Nasrallah the head of Hezbollah, just a few days ago, in support of the Houthi movement. Not only did he go out, in such a open way to attack Saudi Arabia, but he had 4 or 5 members of the Houthi movement on the front row, and the Hezbollah cameras panned to them as he spoke. So the Hezbollah is not an organization that is in the emotional support business. It's the most successful covert military organization in the world, and it has been building up a relationship with the Houthi movement. Now we are in agreement that Yemen suffers from its own internal problems, and the Zaydis in Yemen are a very mild form of Shi'ism. They're very close to the Sunni community, and in fact, Saudi Arabia had originally supported the royalists who were Zaydis. So it only became a religious and regional issue when the Iranians started to see an opportunity to project their power and built a relationship with the Houthis through Hezbollah.
Ali, at
when
this
that
point,
happened,
wait a minute.
Barbara Slavin in Washington wants to say something.
Yeah, let's return to the original events of 2011, 2012. I mean, you had a country that was in meltdown. You had a rebellion against Ali Abdullah Saleh. The United States, the Saudis, others in the GCC got together and installed an incredibly lackluster president who had been the vice president, President Hadi. And over the ensuing couple of years, he has completely failed to reconcile the various elements of Yemeni society. And the Houthis obviously felt that they had grievances, and so they acted.
And those grievances, I don't think anybody has an issue with those grievances. You see, the internal problems of Yemen are not in dispute.
But you're making it sound like it's an Iranian conspiracy.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that.
Iran
what I'm saying,
took advantage of the situation.
Hear me out a second. What I'm saying is that Iran took advantage of the situation.
Yeah,
and that there would not be, if the fact that they took advantage of the situation is that Hezbollah established a relationship with the Houthi movement. Hezbollah is a military organization.
Ali and Barbara,
and the fact that they established that relationship is
I'm
proof.
afraid we're just going to have to take a short break. Just press the pause button because no doubt this is going to continue. Do stay with us, viewers, for the second part of the France 24 debate.